Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. Sometimes in politics progress can be very, very slow. But I'd like to congratulate the Labor Party on its contribution just then, because we might have seen a glimmer, just a glimmer, of progress when it comes to reforming our nation's financial mess. I'd like to start by just talking about Senator Moore's contribution. It was very pleasing to see Senator Moore suggest that the government, the opposition, is not necessarily opposed to the idea of a commission of audit. That is a small tick. We heard from Senator Moore that the Labor opposition is not opposed to reviewing programs to make sure that we do get better value for taxpayers' money. So that is a small tick. And it was heartening to hear Senator Moore's contribution where she said that the Labor opposition is not alleging automatically that the new government might slash services to Australian taxpayers. So progress is slow in politics, but I think, ladies and gentlemen, we might have had a glimmer of some progress in Senator Moore's contribution just a moment ago. Senator Moore made the point quite correctly that we should start as we intend to finish. And I think that's very, very important, and I'd like to come back to that point in a moment. However, what we didn't hear from the Labor opposition was an admission that there is a problem. We did not hear from the Labor opposition that we have a problem in our country. I don't think Australian voters will accept that. I don't think Australian voters will buy that particular suggestion. So don't believe Senator Moore, don't even believe Senator Smith. I'd just like to quote from a number of eminent commentators in our country, and I thought I might start with Paul Kelly from the Australian newspaper, when he provided some commentary around the Commission of Audit when it was first announced by our Treasurer and by the Minister for Finance, my West Australian colleague Senator Cormann. So don't believe me, don't believe the Labor opposition. Let's hear what Paul Kelly had to say from the Australian newspaper. He went on to say that this was documented by Finance Minister Matthias Cormann, who said that in 6 years of ALP government, the average annual spending increase was more than 4% in real terms. The average increase in spending was more than 4% in real terms, irrespective of Labor's fiscal rules. So irrespective of what the previous government had tried to do, average spending increased by 4% annually. This figure will haunt Labor. Not my words, not Tony Abbott's words, but Paul Kelly's words about the performance of the former previous government. This figure will haunt Labor, he says. In short, the fiscal stimulus from 2008-9 global crisis created a new spending plateau under the former government. The daunting strategic task facing Abbott and Hockey, Mr Kelly says, now emerges. They seek to impose off the Audit Commission a vast fiscal and public sector efficiency reform on an economy that is fragile and facing great investment uncertainties. There is a problem and it needs to be addressed, but we heard not a hint from the Labor opposition that this country might be facing some dark days. So that's Paul Kelly. I'd like to quote for a moment from Adam Crichton, the economics contributor from the Australian newspaper. Adam says in a very, very informed article in the Weekend Australian on the 26th of October in this year, he says Australia's apparent immunity to the economic travails of Europe and the US rests mainly on China's powerhouse economy and its demand for our resources. This conveniently papers over an economy beset by excessive regulation, public spending and federal dysfunction. This is an economy that was presided over for 6 years by the Labor opposition, and we heard not one word in the previous contribution that there was a problem. Adam goes on to say, resource revenues are tipped to recede, leaving Australia's government's growing structural deficit starkly exposed. The RBA is anticipating a slump in mining investment, and early signs other sectors will take up the slack aren't promising. Unemployment continues to edge towards 6% and investment levels outside mining as the Reserve Bank Deputy Governor—
Order, Senator Smith. A point of order, Senator Gallagher.
Mr Deputy President, may I ask that the senator address his submission or speech to the chair?
Yeah, he has been largely addressing his speech to the chamber, and I noticed he's acknowledging the gallery. But Senator Smith, you have the call.
I'd be very, very pleased to share my contribution to you, Mr Acting Deputy President. So I'll just continue the quote, and I'll start. Unemployment continues to edge towards 6%, and investment levels outside mining, as Reserve Bank Deputy Governor Phil Lowe pointed out this week, are at 50-year lows despite rock-bottom official interest rates. So we have inherited the front benches, the Treasury benches, and we know there is a problem. Labor Party, the Labor opposition, full credit to the small concessions that Senator Moore made in her contribution, but they are still blind to the fact that our country has a problem. They are blind to the fact that our country has a problem. So I just want to go back to Senator Moore's contribution, where she reflected on the fact that we should start where we intend to finish. And I think when we want to understand the motivation of our colleagues opposite, it's important to understand where they finished on September the 7th. Where did they finish on September the 7th? And this might give some insight to their lack of willingness to understand and appreciate and acknowledge the serious economic predicaments they've left our country. So where did the Australian Labor Party finish on the 7th of September? The coalition, in contrast to Labor, had swings towards it in every state and territory. The coalition finished well, achieving a majority of two-party preferred vote in all 6 states for the first time since 1977. Where did Labor finish? Labor recorded its lowest primary vote in 100 years. The Greens, Labor's friends in government, the Greens had their worst Senate vote in 3 elections. In my own state of Western Australia, Labor's primary vote crashed to just 28.7%. Senator Gallagher, are you grimacing? All right. The Liberal Party's primary vote, by contrast, in Western Australia was 47.3%. I'm proud to share was the highest across the country. When you look around electorates across our country, the coalition won 51 seats on the primary vote alone. Where did Labor finish? Labor won just 7 seats on the primary vote. This resulted in a clear mandate for the Abbott Trust coalition government, and I'll come to that at another time in another debate in this place. So we can see Labor doesn't want to admit there's a problem, but they are making some progress minute by minute. Unfortunately, Mr Acting Deputy President, we've not seen much imagination from Labor in the last 2 days. In question time, this very issue was asked of our leader, Senator Eric Abbott, the Leader of the Government in the Senate. He was asked by Senator Wong, I refer to the Prime Minister's election commitment and his absolute assurance to the Australian people that this government would not make cuts to health and education. Sounds very familiar. It's what we're talking about today. But the Labor opposition wasn't satisfied with yesterday's answer, so they brought the same issue back to the chamber today. Yep, not satisfied. The message will get through over time, I'm very, very sure. Senator Abbott's contribution in response to Senator Wong's question was, this government has every intention of abiding by its election promises. Could it be clearer? This government has every intention of abiding by its election promises. Senator Abbott's went on to say, it really does come as a shock to those opposite, those in the Labor opposition. It comes as a shock to those opposite that we can have a government in this country that has every intention of abiding by its election promises. In relation to health and education, what we are talking about here this afternoon, in relation to health and education, we have said that the totality of the monies made available in those portfolios would remain. What we have also said is that it will look at the quality of the spend in areas to ascertain whether money can be redirected, and as a result, get even better results, but within the parameters of those two portfolio areas. We were very specific in relation to that. If I might just go out on a limb, I think that Senator Moore might have heard the answer yesterday. I think Senator Moore might have heard the answer yesterday, and that was part of her sort of small concession this afternoon, that we may actually be able to achieve better value for taxpayers' money without spending less. Anyway, Senator Abbott did go on to say that the Labor opposition should be very, very cautious about judging us by their own standards. So today we're talking about health and education cuts. Health and education cuts. And if I may, Mr Acting Deputy President, I thought I might just share the perspective of the previous government's health minister. I think I might just bring to the Senate chamber some views, some learnings that Senator Moore's esteemed Labor House colleague Nicola Roxon shared just recently at the John Button Memorial Address. This gives us a very powerful insight. Very, very powerful insight. That's exactly right, Senator Cormann. It was not a speech that would have been received by Kevin Rudd and his peers very, very well. I might just share some of the attitudes of the former Minister for Health, given that today's discussion is about health and education.
Order.
Senator Gallagher, please do not encourage me. Please do not encourage me to rush to my part of the speech, which talks about the parlous state of Labor Party finances. Would you like me to rush to that part of my speech now, or are you happy to?
On my left.
Happy to hear what the former Minister of Health had to say about the performance of the former Prime Minister and indeed the government. And I'm quoting from John Button's memorial address of the 16th of October 2013. Kevin had a fatal attraction to everyone else's problems, she said. He never saw a problem that he didn't believe he should try and fix. She went on to say, Kevin also had an overwhelming inclination to focus on minutiae as a way of avoiding the big, harder decisions. So the Labor opposition would like to come to this place to talk about the spectre of possible health and education cuts, when in actual fact their government was dysfunctional and full of waste. Senator Moore, was that
one review after the other, and then reviews into reviews, you did nothing.
Order. Senators. Only one senator is entitled to speak, and that's Senator Smith. Interjections across the chamber are disorderly. And also, Senator Smith, could I just remind you to direct your remarks to the chair? Thank you. Order on my left. And Senator Smith, you have the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. Just two more quotes, and then I'd like to get to the substance of what is a very, very important issue in correcting our nation's finances. Second last quote from the former Health Minister. In addition to the lack of, and this is important because this goes to the heart of process, and how the former government functioned. And as a consequence of this poor process, there was clearly waste. In addition to the lack of Cabinet engagement on some big strategic calls, Cabinet also misused by being asked to deal in enormous detail with material it could never hope to be fully across. This meant that many ministers managed to be both frustrated about a lack of attention to some key areas, as well as being exhausted by huge amounts of energy required on less significant matters. There were some contentious issues, Nicola Roxon went on to say.
Order, Senator Smith. Senator Brown, you have a point of order.
The general business motion, Mr Deputy President, is that the Senate condemns the government for its failure, and Senator Smith, I remind him he is now the government, for its failure to rule out cuts to health and education programs. Now, that was the commitment that was given by Mr Abbott prior to the election, and now we see and we know that the Commission of Audit, as announced by the Treasurer, that no area of the budget has been ruled out.
You're starting to debate the issue. You've raised a point of order. I'm happy to rule on it. Senator McCormack on the point of order.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. On the point of order, the Labor opposition is clearly embarrassed by what Senator Smith is so eloquently,
Senator Cormann,
eloquently
Senator
talking about.
Cormann, you're also
on the point
you're
of
also
order,
debating
on the point of order, Mr.
order.
Deputy President, what Senator Smith is doing is comparing and contrasting the performance of the Abbott government with the dysfunctional, chaotic and incompetent performance in health and education by the Rudd and Gillard governments.
Order on both sides. Senator Smith has been referring to the subject matter constantly throughout his speech. He's referring to other matters at the moment, but he has been returning to the subject matter. You are in order. You can continue, Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I left the quote in regards to health issues to the last. A quote from Nicola Roxon in October of this year. There were some contentious issues and policy problems that ran for months, in some cases years, without there seeming to be a way of bringing contentious issues to a head. There was no avenue for ministers to bring genuinely difficult issues where there were legitimately tricky calls to be made to Cabinet for real discussion. Health, let me repeat that, health and climate change were the two longest-running non-discussions for the first term of government, with some other contentious policies getting only cursory Cabinet approval at the last minute. There was a reticence by the Prime Minister for big strategic calls to be made by Cabinet or sufficiently in advance to prepare properly. So it is no surprise that the Labor opposition in its contribution so far does not want to concede that there is a problem that needs to be addressed by a Commission of Audit. I'd just like to turn briefly now, Mr Acting Deputy President, to the Commission of Audit and why it's important. As we know, as many will know, that the National Commission of Audit, its role is to assess the role and scope of government. That is a timely and necessary activity, and to ensure, most importantly, that taxpayers' money is spent wisely and efficiently. And certainly my colleagues on this side of the Senate chamber regard that as a high and important priority of any government. But in addition to that, the government will look at, and this is a topic of great interest to West Australian senators and to myself in particular, the work of the Commission of Audit will specifically address the division of responsibilities between local, state and federal governments. And again, this is a timely and necessary activity, one that could easily have been undertaken in the last 6 years, but for the chaos and dysfunction and waste that we saw in the former minister's comments, that wasn't taken place. But I think it's important.
Order.
And I would like to note a point that Senator Moore made in her contribution that is worthy of illuminating, and that is will be a public. It will be, importantly, a public process as well as an internal government process. And I would expect that the various stakeholders and interest groups across the country will make a sizeable contribution to that. And importantly, the discussion will be about how we can do more with less, because it is not necessarily correct to suggest that because you spend more, you have a better outcome. And I can point to no end of public policy areas in this country where taxpayers think, quite rightly, that huge sums of money have been spent with little or no positive outcome. Importantly, and I think this speaks to the efficiency with which the government is embracing its new responsibilities, the initial report will be provided to government at the end of January 2014, at the end of January next year, so that the final report can be incorporated into this government's first budget. And that's an important element in the progress of this important initiative. I'm also pleased to say that the Commission of Audit includes a prominent West Australian, Mr Bob Fisher, and I'm sure that Mr Fisher will make an outstanding contribution in making sure that the issues and interests of West Australian taxpayers are certainly front and centre in this review as well. I think it's important to identify the fact that for the first time in 20 years, we're having a Commission of Audit of this kind, and the objective is a clear one: to deliver a surplus of 1% of GDP prior to 2023. By any measure, that is a noble objective and one that is in our national interest. And I'd like to hear my Senate colleagues on the other side embracing that as a sound objective for the Commission of Audit. I think it's worth just saying, Mr Acting Deputy President, before I move on, that it's important that we recognise that there are 932, almost 1,000 federal agencies in our Commonwealth that will be part of this review. By any measure, that sounds like a large number of bodies, and it's worthy to undertake an inquiry into whether or not they are all necessary and whether or not they are all doing what is required of them in the most efficient and effective way. And I think we also need to recognise, this fact that 76% of the budget, 76% of the budget is spent on health, welfare and social services alone. And it is right to have a discussion, to have a process where we say, are we doing things as effectively and efficiently with taxpayers' money as we possibly could? And to suggest for a moment that the world in 2013 should be the same as the world that existed in 2007 to September the 7th, 2013 is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. So in the contributions that follow, I hope that there will be sensible, reasoned discussion and that people will be able to point to the merits of this particular process in reforming our nation's finances so that we can put ourselves in the best position to capture the opportunities that exist for us, not us in the region, but exist for us globally. And I hope that as a parliament we'll all be able to embrace that and, importantly, start to think out of our box, out of our ideological prisms, so that we can get the best for the Australian community through this particular process. So I'd like to start.
Order. You have the call, Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. I have every confidence that when that interim report is provided to government in January, I have every confidence when the budget is presented next year.
Order, Senator Smith. Your time has expired.